There we go. Section 6 of the LWRP, state and federal actions and programs likely to affect implementation. Section 7 is local commitment and consultation. Then we'll go over what should be in the appendices to the LWRP, which sometimes can be as lengthy as the LWRP document itself. The LWRP review and approval process. And then we'll do a little review at the end using the checklist that we talked about at the very beginning. So that's our plan for today. So let's start with section 6. So the Waterfront Act, Article 42, says that an LWRP has to identify the elements of the program, the LWRP, that can be implemented by the local government unaided, and those elements of the program that can only be implemented with the aid of other levels of government or other agencies. So to meet that directive in Article 42, first we had Section 5, we did that last week. So those are the local government implementation measures, how the local government will meet that requirement in Article 42. For state and federal actions, we use Section 6. And this is a standard section, two parts of this I'm going to talk about in a second, are standard sections, and then the third one is one that you revise. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that distinction. So in the coastal area, Section 6 consists of 3 sections. If your LWRP is in the coastal area of New York State. Section 6.1 is state agency programs. Do not revise this, we will provide it. And Section 2 is federal agency programs. So what that means is the state agency programs are programs which shall be undertaken in a manner consistent with the LWRP. So what that means is state parks, if there's a state park in the community within the waterfront revitalization area, that the state park needs to be consistent with the policies and purposes of your local LWRP. So sometimes they might need to do a consistency review at the state, we call it state consistency, for some type of action, like a new building they might want to build in their state park. So that's a state action which needs to be consistent with the LWRP. Then in that list, you'll see, and some people think they're supposed to delete them. Don't delete anything, like state liquor authorities in there. How does that intersect with LWRP? Say they had a facility, some type of a review or offices, even just office building in the waterfront revitalization area. So it can be some type of facility that a state agency has within the WRA. So there's a lot of state agencies on that list. It should not be revised. Then the section 6.2 is a list of federal activities. For example, Army Corps of Engineers or the federal DOT is building a road in the waterfront revitalization area. They should be consistent with your LWRP and using that as a review document for what the community sees as their goals. That list should not be revised either. These lists are approved by the NOAA's Office of Coastal Management, and they're fairly old. What we have to do is go through a process of updating those lists with NOAA and making sure we have the right names of the federal agency programs. But for now, it's the approved list. You just use those with no changes. Even though they look out of date, they are, but we have to do that here at the state level to update 6.1 and 6.2. Then 6.3, again in the coastal area, is something that you do revise. So when we provide you the template, it has some suggestions. So state parks or DEC, ... So is there a particular DEC boat landing in your waterfront revitalization area, or a particular state park? So, or a particular program run like DEC has watershed planning grants, or you know, things like that. So for 6.3, you list state agency programs that might more directly be applicable to the community. Because in 6.2, they aren't as specific as one state park. It's just state parks programs. So 6.3, you can get a little more specific about a particular state program or facility that relates to your waterfront revitalization area. So that's how that works. Then for inland LWRPs, there's only 2 sections, because in the inland ones, the federal agency list does not apply. We don't do federal consistency review in the inland areas. That only happens in the coastal area of the state. So in the inland ones, you just do the 6.1. Again, do not revise that. That's the same list as the coastal, but you will use it for inland. Then 6.2, again, is more focused list of agency programs that might be directly applicable to your community. And so for an inland one, you only have 2 of these section 6 parts. I hope that's pretty clear. Okay, let's move on to section 7. This is called local commitment and consultation with other affected federal, state, regional, and local agencies. It's a long name, but what goes in this section is all the community outreach efforts and meetings with other agencies, citizen participation, activities of the Waterfront Advisory Committee, whether they be meetings or site visits, how you've involved disadvantaged and underserved community members, public surveys that were conducted, public workshops and meetings. So in section 7, include a short summary or paragraph, you know, a few pages about these things you've done. If you have the actual survey results, it's better to put that in appendix. You know, if there's, you know, 10 or 15 pages of data on a survey that you want to include, put that in an appendix. Be a better place to put that. So this is kind of a summary of all the public participation that has happened during development of the LWRP. So that's public participation. Then also local business involvement. If there's been involvement by adjacent municipalities and the county, how you worked with them to develop the LWRP, businesses, and then the consultation part of the title is, did you consult with DEC? So I put a picture in of a handicapped veterans accessible boat launch in the village of Dexter up in Jefferson County. It's a really nice example of a handicapped kayak launch. So did you coordinate with DEC for permitting for different projects that appear in section 4 of your LWRP, or local land trust about areas to conserve? That type of consultation goes in section 7. If there were federal agencies that you discussed different topics with, on Long Island, Fire Island National Seashore is involved in the Brookhaven LWRP as an example. So all those things go in section 7, the LWRP. Then the appendices. So you need to include the local waterfront consistency review law. We suggest that it be Appendix A. It doesn't have to be, but it's probably one of the most important implementation techniques for your LWRP. And we talked about that last week in section 5. There's 3 different versions of that we have available. So that should be Appendix A. When you do your draft LWRP and you're doing a new LWRP, that will be a proposed law. And then after the community adopts the consistency law, the LWRP will change in the final version that goes to the secretary, and then it will say adopt, the actual local law number 4 of 2025 or something. So in the beginning it's draft, and then we either the consultant or DOS, depending on where you are in your grant cycle, changes title to be adopted, or the name of the adopted law. If there's other new or amended local laws and regulations, for example, well, the other one is the harbor management law, which if you don't already have a harbor management law, you'll probably need one for your LWRP. So that would be a second one that should be in an appendix. It might start as a draft. Again, then the final LWRP, it will be the adopted version. And sometimes there's changes between the original one and the adopted. In a couple of communities I'm working with right now, there's Sackett's Harbor and Plattsburgh. There's changes right near the end there, especially on that harbor management lawsuit. In the final LWRP, we want to make sure the final version of these laws is included in that final LWRP, the adopted version. Also in the appendices should be the significant coastal fish and wildlife habitat rating forms. There's a description narrative and maps that can be downloaded from our website and from the GIS gateway. Those are the ones that are designated in Article 42, the ones that DOS and DEC worked on. Sometimes these get confused with the significant ecological communities in New York State, which are not the same thing. These are designated areas, designated on a map. So at the very beginning of the process, in the inventory and analysis, we talked about these. You should be looking to see if any of those are in the community, and they should be included in the appendix and talked about in section 2. The harbor management plan can be an appendix if it wasn't integrated into the different sections. It can be an appendix. And also, even if it was integrated into the different sections, you should include a chart, which is another appendix we have in our guidance document that we talked about in section 2 and section 4. So a chart showing where the requirements for a harbor management plan are located in the LWRP. So instead of the full harbor management plan, that chart would be in an appendix. So one of those two scenarios. Historic documents and maps. Sometimes communities like to put the underwater lands maps in there that come from the Office of General Services. If you have a lot going on with underwater lands in your community. Some communities, again, Village of Sackett's Harbor, we put their historic boundary maps in there. We had to do a lot of research, and our attorney wanted us to show what that original boundary was of the village to make sure, that we're depicting the waterfront revitalization area as the boundary of the village. We had to get some historic maps. We ended up putting those in the appendix. And then excerpts from plans or other documents. So that can be if you've done a site-specific waterfront design plan or design project, and sometimes through one of our grants, and you want to show those more detailed designs that were related to, say, a park or a series of parks or a waterfront area, and that was referred to in section 2 and section 4, then the more detailed plan design document should be put in an appendix. If something's talked about a lot in section 2 and section 4, it's good to put that original document in the appendix. Okay. So that was the appendices, and sometimes there's more things that come up that are important to your community that you might list of, species or more detailed list of historic sites if you want if you talk about a more detailed list in the narrative, then put that more detailed data in an appendix. Okay. So now let's get into the LWRP review and approval process. This process can be thought of in 3 different levels. So the municipality reviews under the State Environmental Quality Review Act and goes through the steps of seeker like you do when you adopt other types of plans. Then New York State conducts what we call 60-day review. That's how it's described in Article 42, Executive Law, our Waterfront Act, and it's governed by the Department of State implementing regulations. So sometimes people get confused. They think that when we say 60-day review, we're talking about seeker. We're not. It's a separate process that we're required to do under Article 42, and we conduct that process. And then for coastal LWRPs, the federal government, NOAA's Office of Coastal Management, reviews the LWRP. It's governed by the federal regulations, and they determine whether the LWRP is a program change to the New York State Coastal Management Program. So that's what they do, but that doesn't apply to inland ones, just to the coastal ones. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these. So when the preliminary draft LWRP is submitted, this is also the culmination of those of you that have done these now. There's a number of back and forths between the community and consultants and our staff here at DOS. And then once you've got the preliminary draft that has all the required sections, maps, the proposed local laws and appendices, keep it in Microsoft Word at that point, because we still want to do a final review, graphics and digital photo format. These are requirements that are in your grant work plan if you have a grant. And then maps can be in PDF format. When it gets to the end of the grant, again, this is just kind of a reminder about the grant, we also need the digital map data. And why is that? Because our GIS staff take the boundary of your waterfront revitalization area and they put that into our GIS system. So it will appear on the GIS gateway maps of the coastal area and all the LWRPs in New York State. So we need that data to put your LWRP on our statewide mapping GIS system. So we review and comment on that preliminary draft. We circulate it to our legal counsel and our coastal consistency staff. And then comments will be included in a red line markup document to be returned to the village, town, or city and consultants. So about this time, you should be thinking about seeker as you get to the preliminary draft. So you go through the steps, the classification of the action. LWRPs are a type 1 action. You prepare your environmental assessment form, do the determination of significance. So we ask for that before the state does our 60-day review. So you would send the EAF, the determination of significance, and the local resolution showing that the local legislative body approved that determination, whether it be a neg deck or a pos deck. Most LWRPs are a neg deck. Occasionally they're a positive deck, usually in the larger cities. But if it's a neg deck, that makes it a little bit easier, but occasionally they may be a pos deck. Then after the state does the 60-day review, the municipality's adoption, as I said, of the LWRP and local law is a type 1 action that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. That adoption should come after the 60-day review. And then all these resolutions relating to seekers should be provided to your project manager if you have a grant, and that this is a task in the grant work plan as well, the seeker. Then once the comments, final comments from DOS you have addressed those final comments, then you submit what we call the complete draft. And that should be all the comments are addressed. Microsoft Word and PDF is really, really helpful if you have that final formatted PDF with bookmarks, because we do that here if you don't do it. And so we have 100 of them to do. So if you, as the consultant or local staff, keep this, then this again is the complete draft, once you've addressed all the comments. But still also submit that red line strikeout version so we can see how the comments were addressed. And again, all the maps. So at this point, again, we're still before 60-day review. So we need a resolution from the municipal board saying they're accepting the LWRP as complete, not adopting, but accepting, and they're submitting it to DOS along with the maps, proposed laws, and everything that goes with it. The formal adoption should come after the 60-day. And the reason for that is there might be comments submitted during 60-day about the LWRP and local laws. So occasionally revisions need to be made to the LWRP and local laws as a result of the 60-day review that we conduct. So at this point, you're accept, and we have sample resolutions that your LWRP project manager can send you that match these different steps. So what we do internally here, just as a note, and a lot of these things take more time than you think. When you think, oh, we send it to DOS, it'll be a month. Well, unfortunately, it takes a little bit longer than that. So your project manager that's assigned to you sends it to the processing coordinator, who has been me for a while. I do just a really detailed review, and then send it to legal counsel for final review and sign off for that 60-day. And a lot of the things that I find are things that would be great if you as consultants and staff can do, things like the table of contents doesn't match the page numbers, or the figure numbers are not correct. And one I had recently, they changed it from map to figure. Some of them said map 3, other ones said figure 3, figure 5. So things like that, it just please, do those things before this final, before the complete draft for 60-day is submitted. Or things like updating, the name of a state park or DEC property, or just, references, things like that. So thank you for working on those things. It makes us faster, because it has to be an almost perfect document for our management and legal to sign off on it. We have somebody in the executive department, one of our deputy secretaries, who will find the things that I just said. If you don't do it and I don't do it, they will find it. So thank you in advance. Okay, so the 60-day review, once we have that complete draft, this is required in Article 42, as I said. Secretary of State must circulate it to state, federal, and local agencies and allow 60 days for comments. In the law, there is a provision for 21 days in the case of a minor amendment. However, as long as I've been here at DOS, I don't think we've ever done that. Because usually when we get an amendment in, usually it's been 20 years, sometimes 10, since the community's first LWRP. Mapping is all different. A lot of things have changed. So there is a provision for that. If there were an LWRP, you desperately want to update it and it hasn't been done that long ago, we could use that 21-day provision. Then our project managers prepare the 60-day review package. We determine when it's going to be published in the state register with a public notice. We ask you as the community for a list of local and regional agencies or organizations that you would like the draft circulated to. It's all done electronically. So say there's a land trust or one of your county agencies that you'd like us to circulate it to. You send us a list and with the contact email and information. So we add that to the state and federal agencies that we're going to circulate it to, as well as, of course, the mayor or supervisor. So we do that circulation by email, publish the notice. We collect all the comments here, and the staff, LWRP project manager prepares a response to each of the comments that come in. Sometimes we reach out to you as the communities if we need clarification on something that a commenter has said and work with you on that. And then we finalize that response. And if any changes need to be made to the LWRP, if the consultant still has capacity as part of the grant, they can do that, or if not, sometimes we do the final changes to the LWRP. Then after the 60-day review, we work with the communities and their consultants to prepare a clean version of the final LWRP. No red lines. Again, everything matches up. The appendices are there, local laws. That version reflects the 60-day comments and should be all ready for the Secretary of State. So at this point is when the municipality should adopt that final LWRP and the local laws if they haven't already been adopted by resolutions, the LWRP and the local laws. Then you need to submit those certified resolutions via a letter, and that letter can be an email requesting submission to the Secretary of State for approval. And again, we have sample letters and resolutions that we can provide for that use. Then once we know that you've adopted the LWRP and the local laws, we prepare what's called Article 42 findings. It's different than findings for an environmental impact statement. It's based on the coastal policies and the requirements of Article 42. But we do that. Our legal counsel reviews those findings to ensure that the 60-day comments have been addressed and that the LWRP meets the requirements of Article 42. And they then write a memo to recommend approval. And then we have what we call the Secretary of State package, and we forward all that to the Secretary of State. Then following the Secretary of State approval, we send still actually paper notification letters to that same list of contacts we did for 60-day. So the municipality, county, state legislature, state agencies, although we don't do federal at this point, it's just the state agencies and those organizations that you had given us the names of as well. The same, we create a contact list for 60-day and we use that for each of the steps in Excel. Then in the coastal area, the final step is submission to NOAA's Office of Coastal Management. We do that. There's an online portal they've created, which they created that about 3-4 years ago, which makes it much easier for the federal submission. It's all done on an online portal. And the purpose is to request Office of Coastal Management's concurrence that they agree that this LWRP is a program change to the New York State Coastal Management Program. So we publish a public notice that allows federal agencies to comment on whether they think the action is a program change. If they concur, which about 90% of the time they do, occasionally they have a few things, but most of the time they do, we get a letter, and then it constitutes, the LWRP constitutes program change, and that appends the community's LWRP to the State Coastal Management Program. And the coastal policies in their explanations that are in section 3 of the LWRP replace the policies in the New York State Coastal Management Program for that area covered by the LWRP, which is a pretty powerful mechanism for making sure that your local goals and objectives are reviewed and considered by the federal government and the state government. And just as a reminder, when we did section 3 back in, when did we do that? Back in April? The coastal policies always stay the same, the policy statement. It's the explanations that the community and the consultants can add information about specificity for your community. So it is always the same policies, but it's the explanations that are the important part. Occasionally, sometimes there's sub policies, but anyway, it's a powerful part of the program. All right, what time do we have here? So that was the process, a lot of steps that happen at the end of the LWRP. At this point in time, what I'd like to do is kind of a review of everything we've done over the 8 sessions. And what I wanted to do is just remind you about the checklist for LWRP completeness, which is in Appendix 1 of the guidance document, the new 2024 guidance document. But let's look at the checklist and see if we did everything during this training that we were supposed to do to create an LWRP. So going back to section 1, the boundary, and again, this is a fillable PDF, the little boxes you can check off in the guidance, you can cut it out as a fillable PDF. So the LWRP should include boundaries of the waterfront and waterfront area. And in this checklist, we have the citations from the laws. So you can refer back to them if you need to, or if your council for your community wants to refer back to them. In the inland waterway areas, make sure the boundary meets the threshold of executive law and criteria for adjacent shorelines. So it's important to also think about this for the inland LWRPs. There should be a map and a narrative description of the boundary. The boundary is not drawn more waterward than the coastal boundary. So in other words, we don't want to see the shrinking of the coastal area because you want to continue to protect as much coastal area as we can. Objective of the whole coastal management program. The boundary is not overly broad. There's a nexus to the water. This is the waterfront revitalization program. You know, there are other programs in the state and at GOS that can cover other parts of your community, but this one is the waterfront revitalization program. If you want to expand the boundary, which you can do, the coastal boundary when we're talking about the coastal area, there needs to be a justification for that expansion. Then the maps should show in an identifiable manner. So there, you know, there's some GIS technicians that are really good at this. They're almost artists, I think, some of the GIS technicians on how to show these different things so that they're identifiable. So include the municipal boundary, the proposed LWRP boundary, and the coastal boundary if it's different, you know, if you want to expand it, show what the original coastal boundary is, and the harbor management area boundary, and any federal lands. This is something that's required in an LWRP. Federal lands have to be excluded from the boundary. I mean, they should be mapped in the boundary, but the federal government is in charge of those, not the community or the, you know, so there is a requirement to show where those federal lands are if you have any. So these are the basic things. Also refer back to, you know, the chapter in the guidance that talks about the boundary, but this checklist helps make sure you have everything you need. Then section 2, we need to see an inventory of the natural and historic resources of the waterfront to be protected. And we have that inventory analysis toolkit that's also in fillable PDF in the appendices of the guidance document. A statement of the goals and objectives of the program. This is kind of, buried in Article 42, but, I mean, it's listed in Article 42. It's not, sometimes it's left out of LWRPs, but usually when you do a public process, you start with goals and objectives. So this can, if you start section 2 with the goals and objectives, then it's clear that it's included there. So sometimes if our legal staff have to hunt for the goals and objectives, sometimes that makes it harder to find them. Anyway, I guess my point is have some page, have a call out box or something that shows what the goals and objectives of the program are. Then there should be an analysis, not just an inventory. And we talked about this in section 2. That the analysis specifies how different topics and resources are connected to the waterfront and inform the community's future plans. There's also an analysis of the zoning and land use patterns in the community. Then identify current and future challenges, whether they be flooding, revitalization, redevelopment, wetland protection, whatever they are. Then the elements for an implementable harbor management plan are identified. And these are taken right from the statements of requirements in the Article 42 and the regs. And as we've talked about as during this training, the harbor management plan can be integrated in the LWRP, or it could be a single document in an appendix. And if it's integrated, that chart should be provided, as we talked about a few minutes ago. Then, continuing with the checklist, the inventory analysis has to be detailed enough to support the coastal policy. So this is in the checklist to make sure that you think about that. Also, to support the proposed land use controls and existing controls in sections 2 and 5, and proposed projects described in section 4. So we need that information to support the rest of the LWRP. Risk and resiliency issues are identified and analysis is presented. And as we had our special session on the tools that we have available for that and other tools that are available online, and some of the consultants that are on here now are probably have even more ideas about risk and resiliency assessment. And I think, as I said during that session, don't be afraid to include enough money in grant applications for risk and resiliency analysis, because we really want to see that. We're focusing on that in the last few years and going forward. Maps are included in the inventory analysis to show locations of important features, and Appendix 4 of the guidance, the maps guidance appendix, has a list of the maps that are required and then which ones are optional. So use that Appendix 4 to help with that one. Then the policies. We had our training session on policies. Again, the policy statement should be exactly as it appears, should not be altered or modified. This is because each word in the policy is derived from state laws. So they have to stay that way, and it should be in bold font, because that's actually something that NOAA asked for, so especially important for the coastal area. They're always, each time they ask us, are those policy, are the bold fonts the policy? So don't bold anything else in section 3. It should just be the policies. Some policies can be included, but they should be brief and clear statements of policies, and that would be, they shouldn't rephrase state policy. The state policies are very broad and include a lot of different situations related to whichever policy that is. So the explanations, the state policy explanations should be retained as written, but then you can add language about specific local context. However, the explanation shouldn't contain extensive descriptive information which belongs in the inventory and analysis. It shouldn't include indefinite references like The municipality will consider. We want to know what you will do. The LWRP is actually a regulatory document. So not you're going to consider what this is what is going to be done going forward. And then describe, it should not describe how you intend to implement it. That goes in section 4, projects. The policy explanations should include identification of areas where resources are particularly important. And then you can also add specific guidelines or standards by which to measure coastal consistency for that policy. If you feel that a policy is not applicable to conditions in your waterfront area, which should only be very few instances, which as we talked about, like the ports of New York State, which is one of the policies if you don't have a port. But if you're near a port, still include it because it could influence your waterfront areas. So, you know, it's somewhat subjective, but it's only in limited circumstances. If that is the case, you have to explain why the policy is not applicable. Then local laws or ordinances will not be included in section 3, but when you're doing your policy section, make sure that your local laws will implement the policies and will not conflict with them. And then we ask for a chart showing which of the local laws implement the different policies. And there's an example of that in the appendix to the guidance document. You can include a definitions section in section 3. And there's, if you're going to do that, make sure to check 19 New York CYR 600.2, which is definitions of the coastal management program in the regulations. So make sure that your definitions agree with the definitions in that section. Okay. Oops, wait, sorry. So section 4, the proposed land and water uses and proposed projects. So we've talked about this when we did session 4 or session 5 or 6, anyway, of our training. This should include land uses, existing and proposed land uses and existing proposed projects to be accommodated in the waterfront area. A map of land uses and water uses should be included, and the locations of proposed projects on a map. Projects have to comply with local zoning and furtherance of the Article 42. And for projects funded by the Department of State or by the projects funded by the state must advance a public purpose. For our program in the LWRP, they need to be on public property as well. So the community should have required property interest. Again, if it's going to be funded by the EPF, and they should be tied to issues related in section 2. So, and then in appendix 9, we have the project profile template that can be used for the projects. Just as a reminder, this doesn't have to be used for every project. It's primarily the priority projects, but for this project profile template. For other projects, and I forgot to mention this when we did section 4. So if you're not going to use a project profile template, we still want to have a paragraph describing that project and why it's important to the waterfront and the community. So that question came up, I think, earlier in the training, but I just wanted to emphasize that. The template for the priority projects, and then another section with a paragraph about other projects that you didn't use the whole template for. And then a chart summarizing all proposed projects, including time frame, priority, and a range of how much it's going to cost. And then section 5, we talked about last week, techniques for local implementation, how the community is going to implement the LWRP, specifying what the authority is, the board that's going to do the consistency reviews, the boards that's going to apply for grants, or the entity, how the LWRP will be managed, local laws that are in place or proposed to implement the LWRP. And then I just talked about putting in appendices, proposed laws, include the zoning map. We'd like to see that in the LWRP, a summary chart rating. I mentioned that before, the coastal policies to local legislation, who's going to do the consistency reviews, identification of the coordination and planning needed with other state or federal agencies. So that is usually just a paragraph about, like, again, if there's a state park in your community and they're looking to expand or they're looking to close or something, how you're coordinating with them. Because when we circulate it, this will get circulated to state parks or LWRP, and they might ask that question, which they have. Actually, one LWRP, I think the community wanted to build a road near or next to the state park or alter something, and they hadn't talked to the state park representatives about that. So those kinds of things should be done during development of the LWRP. Then the guideline for notification and review, that's a template we provide you, and that guides the state agencies and federal agencies of how to coordinate with your LWRP community when they do their consistency reviews. So that can be in section 5 or it can be in an appendix. Some of our staff advocate for it being in section 5 because it kind of goes along with everything else in section 5. And then the financial resources necessary, and then is it going to be covered by your, what's going to be covered by your municipal budget? And then you could have some other sources of funding that you want to list in there. Then section 6, we talked about this today, the list that we will give you for 6.1 and in the coastal 6.2 of state agency activities, and then 6.3 for coastal area, and then in inland it'll just be 6.1 and 6.2. We will provide you with those. And then section 7 is that local commitment and consultation. There's, it's describing the public involvement, showing that there was public participation, and that's required in the waterfront act, that the public be involved throughout the process, and consultation with other agencies is included. Then the appendices that we talked about today, the consistency law, other laws, CCABs, everything we talked about today. And then finally, this last section that we have on the checklist is the requirements of Article 42 that our attorneys are going to look at very closely in the LWRP. So along with all these very specific things that we just went over, they also want to see these statements that appear in executive law. So the program will be consistent with the coastal policies, achieve the purposes of Article 42, and the secretary should find that and the program incorporates each of the following, and it says to an extent commensurate with the particular circumstances. We talked about that a few times in section 2 and section 4. We realize that every community is different. So, if you don't have a busy harbor, you just have one park. Obviously, your harbor management part of your LWRP is going to be smaller if you only have that one park. So anyway, but what you need to include is facilitation of appropriate industrial and commercial uses, which can benefit from the waterfront, increased use of and access to coastal waters. How's the community plan to do that? The promotion and preservation of scenic, historic, cultural, and natural resources, the strengthening of the economic position of the state's major ports and small harbors, redevelopment of deteriorated sites in different ways, the application of local aesthetic considerations. So again, all these things need to be addressed, talked about in the LWRP. Then the protection of sensitive ecological areas, depending on where you are, that will be different, but that needs to be addressed. And then a statement identifying those elements of the program which can only be implemented by local government, and those can be only implemented with aid of other local levels of government or agencies. So that's what we just talked about today. Section 5 is what the local government does. Section 6 is those lists of other agencies. And then establishment of a comprehensive harbor management plan and the means for its implementation. So that's what they're going to be looking for. And then appended to this checklist is also all the harbor management plan requirements. You can use this as a checklist to make sure that you've addressed them in different sections or in an appendix. So there's these pages are part of this checklist as well. All righty. So we're winding up here. Just as a reminder, we just went through the checklist, all the different sections of the LWRP, what's required. So as a reminder, these are the resources that we have available. The new guidance manual, which is on our website under, so I think there's links in a couple different places, and that this guidance manual includes an overview of the coastal management program, the content of sections 1 through 7, that it has a summary of the approval process, not quite as detailed as what I did today, but there's a summary of the different steps. There's the checklist for completeness, Appendix 1. Appendix 2 is state laws and regulations. If you want to refer to them, Appendix 3 is the guidelines for harbor management plans. That's a 10-page document. Appendix 4 is that MAPS guidance. Appendix 5 is the inland waterways boundary flow chart to help with the inland waterways boundaries, which are a little bit more challenging because we don't have the coastal area to begin with. So that's a resource for those of you in the inland waterways that are just starting LWRP. Appendix 6 is the resiliency principles we talked about when we had the resiliency session. Appendix 7 is that inventory and analysis toolkit. Appendix 8 is the 3 versions of the local consistency law, one for the coastal area, one for Long Island Sound with the 13 policies, one for designated inland waterways for you to use. Appendix 9 is the project profile template, again, a fillable PDF. Appendix 10 is the guidelines for notification and review. And 11 is that sample summary chart of the local laws and the policies related to each other. And Appendix 12 is the harbor management plan chart showing an example showing where those things are located in your LWRP. All righty, so that's a kind of a quick review of everything that we did. We will go to questions and answers, and it seems like people are starting to drop off, so I just wanted to thank everybody for participating. As I said, the sessions will be posted on our website, certificates will be emailed, or again, I'm not sure for paper mailing or emailing them. And I want to tell you to have a great summer. And the other thing I want to tell you is that I am retiring as of tomorrow. So I'm going to have a great summer in our local waterfronts and also in the waterfronts of New Hampshire, one of my favorite places. So I thank everybody for, being involved in this program. And I'm handing it over to the very capable staff here at Department of State, led by Amy DiGaetano, who's our LWRP program manager. And the other 2 people that helped with our presentations on the LWRP, Josh Hun and Lisa Vasilakos, have been helping with the questions. So they're really good resources as well. And then all the other LWRP program managers have been participating in this training and are also very helpful. So, all right. So we have a question. In addition to LWRP implementation funding, what other funding streams are most applicable and our communities most successful at accessing to implement LWRP projects. So we made a list of different programs. Some of them depend on where you are in the state, but there's the Canal Corporation has funding if you have canals in your community. State Parks has helped a lot with waterfront parks and parks within your waterfront revitalization area. DEC has the Water Quality Improvement Program, and they have their Brownfield Cleanup Program. There's the Climate Smart Communities grants, again through DEC, that can help with coastal and waterway areas. And then the Environmental Facilities Corporation has their green innovation grants, if you want to do green infrastructure in your downtown waterfront. And then they also have water and sewer grants, which, they're the ones that can do those large grants that we can't do for water and sewer. Empire State Development has a number of different programs, Restoring New York and other ones that can be applicable to private projects, which our program cannot. So that's something to explore if it's a privately owned project. We also here at Department of State have the Downtown Revitalization area initiative, New York Forward, which in past recent 5-6 years have helped fund LWRP projects with additional funding through DRI, if you get that award for being a DRI or a New York Forward community. We also have our Brownfield Opportunity Areas program, if you have brownfield in your community. And it's similar to our program in that you do a brownfield plan and assessment and have that approved, and then can go forward with implementation. These programs, I recommend you look at the Consolidated Funding Application resource book that just came out when they announced the state CFA program for this year, which was last week. And all the ones that I mentioned, most of them I think are mentioned in the CFA resource book with a little summary. You should always look at the requirements for these different programs and check with the funding source. I've just listed them, but each one has different requirements. And just like us, they can be a little bit different from year to year as to what they're emphasizing in their grants. At the federal level, the Army Corps has some grants that communities might not know about, especially for coastal areas and large rivers. And then there's some targeted programs like the Hudson River Valley Greenway and the Hudson River Estuary Program. If you're in the Hudson Valley, they have grant programs on the waterfronts. And there's the Niagara River Greenway out in the western part of the state with grants for waterfront. So there's a lot available for state grants. And there was another question about how should the LWRP address funding or districts for future improvements related to coastal resiliency. Have any communities created districts for future expenditures? We do not know of any communities that have done that. There's stormwater districts have been talked about in recent years. And there's business improvement districts. So that would be something you would need to explore with your attorney at the local level. So it sounds like an interesting idea. We do not know of any communities that have done districts for coastal resiliency. However, just to note that our LWRP grants will cover that. If your LWRP does some preliminary work on showing, assessing your coastal hazards and projects that are needed to address future climate change impacts, those can be implemented with our funding if they're outlined in an LWRP and they're on public property. So that could be available with those caveats. Okay, so I think that's all of the questions. And I thank everybody for participating, and good luck with implementing and preparing and implementing your LWRPs. Okay, so thanks a lot. Bye.